All right, well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome. My name is Wendy Murray, and I want to thank you very much for joining us for an overview presentation of Sage ERP X3 Financials. But before I start the product demonstration, I just wanted to go over a couple of slides with you to talk about Sage as a company and introduce you to X3. So first of all, Sage has been delivering software solutions to companies like yours for more than 30 years. And what this means to you is that we fully understand the small and mid-sized business market. In that time, we've made large investments in our software offering and have positioned ourselves to be around to support our customers through their growth for years to come. Sage also understands that the mid-market is unique. There are really three types of businesses as we see it. The small businesses that purchase inexpensive configured software packages and then work around deficiencies using manual processes. And on the opposite end of that spectrum are the very large businesses. These companies have deep pockets, and with a few $1 million and plenty of resources, they can spend any amount of time building out their dream solution. In the middle sits the mid-market. The requirements of the mid-market are no less complex than a large business, but the budgets are predetermined and resources are limited, and Sage understands these requirements. Sage ERP X3 offers a very powerful ERP functionality in a cost-effective and flexible offering. This robust functionality is embedded into a single platform. Sage X3 is also 100% web-enabled, so you have the power of the ERP as close as your internet browser. Whether you have 10 or 1,000 users, X3 has both the power and flexibility to work with your business. X3 is used in 55 countries, supports 14 legislations, and is translated into 10 different languages. And also, as part of the Sage family, Sage offers a large network of development partners for application extensions as well as specific add-ons for things like human resources, customer relationship management, and sales tax. Also, today you may not do business outside of North America. However, we all know that with technology, the world is shrinking and it's becoming more and more of a global economy. So that being said, it's not so far-fetched that you will need to do business outside of your current borders. Either way, Sage will be there to support you. We have more than 3,300 customers around the world, translating to over 119,000 licensed users. This is just a cross-section of some of our North American customers. I just wanted to give you that. But now, let's see some software. Okay. So let me just go ahead and all right then. Everybody should be seeing my desktop now. Just before we dive into the financial modules, though, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time navigating and reviewing some of the foundations of the X3 application. First of all, I wanted to start with a view that most of us are familiar with today. And, you know, we're familiar with that menu structure. So I've logged in into X3 as an administrator, so we have access to all the modules. Most of us are used to seeing this menu structure. So on the left-hand side here, I have my browser. As I'm looking at these particular modules that we have access to, and because we've logged in as administrator, we have access to all the modules, I do have the ability then to open up these particular headings. So for example, if I go into AP and AR accounting, I'm now displayed with a number of different choices as to where I need to go. So if I happen to be going into invoicing, I can then open up invoicing, go into customer invoicing or supplier invoicing, I can go into payments and so forth. So each of these headers hold very specific pieces of processes within that particular area. If I'm in financials, I'm now looking at the journal entries that I can go in and put journals in there. So this allows me access to everything within this software environment. Now that being said, these folders can get very, very deep. So with that being said, on this side here, I've got my personal menu or my favorites. So this is really like my little mini menu structure on things that I do on a regular basis. And this is probably where most people are comfortable working with in today's environment. But if I happen to have things that I need to access on a regular basis, I do have the ability just to go ahead and right mouse click and go ahead and add those to my favorites, and then I have availability there. I can then go in and say, well, I don't really need this area here. I can go and just delete that, and then just have the access to the things that I really need. Now, as we go through the application today, we're always going to have access to our browser or our favorites through this little star here, which is our favorites, and I'm going to click on that so I can navigate through that, and I'm going to show you that as we're going through. And then I also can go right into the big browser and see everything that we have access to. Now, that's the old way of looking at things, but really what we want to see is sort of some of the new things of how to access and look through an ERP system. So you'll notice along the top here, I have many tabs, and depending on who I am or what my role is in the organization, my view into my ERP system can be very different. So for example, I'm going to click on the first tab here, which I'm calling My KPIs. Now, you're looking at my personal portal, and I'll emphasize it's personal because X3 is a very personal experience. And depending on, the number of tabs, what's displayed in those tabs is based on really how you or how the user wants to interact with the system. On this particular tab, I've got a number of different blocks of information. And within the X3 environment, you can display many different types of information. So in my KPIs or my key performance indicators, these are the things that are important to me. And this could be at a higher level. In this case here, I'm looking at the organization from a sales perspective. So I've got some statistics here, and we'll take a look at those in just a moment. I have the ability to add some URLs. So if I happen to be interested in some type of things that are going on within the world. In this case here, it's some sporting information, but I may want to have an RSS feed for exchange rates, or if I want to know what's going on in a particular market or commodities and those things I want to be kept abreast of, those could be displayed on my dashboard as well. And also down here, you'll notice that I've got some very high-level type of information saying, well, what was booked today from an AR perspective for sales? What's my AR if I'm looking for cash flow or AP or whatever the case may be. But these are the things that are important to me depending on the role that I have within the organization. This particular block of information here, or statistics, allows me to also drill down in this particular environment. Now I do have the ability to sort of pop those out or make them larger. So by doing that, I can see a full page of this. And I can also look at different types of analysis. So if I'm looking at here a total amount, I may want to look at margins or quantity depending on how the statistic was built and displayed. But I also have the ability to look at these at a high level as also drill down into this information. So if I wanted to see what this particular salesperson is selling, I could just click on that and zoom right down into, in this case here, the product class. So I know that Mark is selling in classes of IT, or they're selling wagons, or they're selling a service or bicycles or whatever the case may be. But also I have the ability to go even further and say, well, out of that particular product class, what exactly is Mark selling? So it is taking me down to a very much lower level so I can see that information at my fingertips. If I look here and drill down a little bit further, I can see who is selling it. So if I'm different types of markets, so in this case here I might have different distribution lines, so I can see that my retailer distribution lines are being very effective. And then I have the ability to go right down into who are we selling this product to. So now I can see all my customers that are buying this particular product, and I can see what makes up this particular sales volume for this particular sales rep. I can then just pop that back in there, and now I have the ability to start drilling around in another area. I do have the ability to change these based on, for example, if I wanted to look at this in, a point type of a graph, if I wanted to look at it more of a bar graph or a line graph, I have the ability to do that as well. In this case here, in this territory with this pie graph, same type of thing. I can drill down right from these particular graphing areas. that really shows me one particular area. Very easy to add things to these particular screens, and we're going to go across here in just a moment. But if I wanted to look at different types of information, or if I say, I've got a lot of AR on here, I'm looking at my KPIs as far as sales go, but I have nothing on purchasing, for example, I can just go over here and add content, and here's a list of many things that I can add onto my personal dashboard. And if I just go down here and take this and I want to know, why are things being sent back to suppliers for this particular graph, I could just drag those onto my dashboard and then have the ability to have these drill downs exactly the same way as I did on my sales territory. So very easily accomplished and very easy to modify these particular dashboards at your fingertips. Now that's one look of a dashboard. You may have different users, of course, within your organization that need to access that data a little bit differently. So if I go across here, I'm going to take a look at, say, for example, my accounts receivable tab here, my AR. And you'll notice here that I've got a lot of different type of information that was in contrast to my KPI tab. So this would be a user or the worker bees of the organization, and they are going to be accessing the system a little bit differently. They're not looking at it at a higher level. They're looking at it more as, transactional based, or what do I have to do in my job. So on the right-hand side here, we're going to come back to this area here, but on the right-hand side here we have within the application what we call requesters or queries, and really what it allows you to do is manage your customers or suppliers or things within your ERP system by exception. I know I get asked all the time, can I run a report because I want to know, for example, any of my payments that haven't been posted yet that I need to go in there. It would be really nice if the system could just tell me what is out there that needs to be done so I can keep on top of it. So these requesters are really designed for you to manage your business by exception. If I wanted to actually go in and look at things that are specific, so if I wanted to look at this unposted payments that are in AR or accounts payable, I can then just click on these lined items. These are hyperlinks, and by clicking on those take us right into that particular area of interest. So in this case here, I'm going right into my accounts payable, and then it's going to be able to tell me, here's the payment that's out there. I can go ahead and post it based on the information that I have. So that allows me to look at that particular area there. Now, those are the dashboards, and really what they, for these queries here, that allows me to drill into the system. The next step, though, is really this area here, which is our process maps, and these are throughout the entire application. It's really an area that is taking, those menu structures that we're used to using and being able to deliver a guideline or a roadmap for users to use. Now, these are more than just pretty pictures. They're interactive, and you can have, these teardrops here will take you right through to the customer invoices. It also tells the users a particular path that they may take based on your organization's requirements or guidelines on how to actually put in a sales invoice, put in, go to check the open items, go into the cash application. These are the steps that you need to take in order to do your job. Each of these roadmaps here, in this case here's accounts receivable. If I click over to say accounts payable, that particular roadmap or visual process map is going to be entirely different. It's going to go into a different area. You can have these defined not only at a high level, this is specific for your job, but it can also do a lot of other things. So for example, if I'm looking at the reporting tab here, I may not be looking at very specific processes, but it's got a different type of a visual for my user to take me somewhere within the ERP system. So these can be not only links to the ERP system, they could be links to other URLs, they could be linked to outside sources or outside applications. So you do have the ability to really leverage these process maps in order to guide your users through their process. I'm just going to go ahead and pop back over to the AR here and talk a little bit about navigating through the system. So we've sort of talked about the menu structure, we've talked about the dashboards and how they are personal and what they can look like from a user's perspective, depending on what my role is within the organization. But when I actually get into the application, how do I move around and how do I do things in there? So I'm just going to go over and pop in here to the customer invoices. So just by clicking on this teardrop, it's going to take me right over to the customer invoice screen. And what I'm presented with here is a typical layout of the entire Sage X3 application. On the left side here, we've got what we call a left list, and really think of it as a file cabinet with a number of different drawers in it. So it allows us to do a lot of navigating or searching and filtering based on the type of information that I want to display on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side here, we've got header information, we've got all the defaults that have come along from this, in this case here, my customer master records, and then I've got the line items on this side here that I can go ahead and enter line information. Now, if I had a lot of data out here and I was looking for things specifically, how would I filter? So there's a number of ways to do that. I could just click right on these particular header columns, and these can be user-defined. So depending on what type of information that you want to sort on or filter on, you can have that information displayed here. I do have the ability, if I'm looking for something specifically, to go into a quick select. So if I'm looking for something with, a number in there that I know that the invoice number has a 06 in it, I can just very quickly filter that. And these filters are on all of these particular header columns. If I hit the F5 key, it refreshes everything. But I also have the ability to do a lot of different other types of selections. So for example, if I go up to my selection here, I have predefined filters that I can save. So for example, if I'm only looking for my unposted invoices, I can go ahead and just click on that, and that filters from that particular area. I can go ahead and look at all of them again. I also have the ability to sort of do keyword searches too. So if I'm looking for something that I have an attachment to, but I know that it's for this particular customer, and I know, oops, let me just go in there again. Sorry about that. Let me just go into my keyword search. It now filters on everything that I've got in a keyword search, and when I click on that now, it now takes me directly to that invoice that has that particular attachment to it. That being said, attachments are throughout the entire application, so I can put anything that I want out there, whether they be scanned documents, whether they be attachments to videos or whatever the case may be, you can have the attachments based on that. Really handy when we get into journal entries, for example, for backup from an Excel spreadsheet or whatever the case may be in that scenario. So that gives me a little bit of navigating through this particular area here. You'll also notice that when I was talking about my favorites and my my browser, I have that availability here as well. So if I wanted to go somewhere else within the application, I don't have to go back out to the main menus to be able to navigate. I can just click on here and go into an entirely different area of the application just by virtue of clicking on my favorites. Or I can click on the actual browser to show me the navigator to show me everything within the environment. But these are also hyperlinks as well. So if I click on my APAR accounting, this not only tells me where I am in the application, we call those breadcrumbs, or where am I and how did I get there, but it also allows me to click on those and navigate through the system based on this particular guidance here. So very quickly that allows me to do move around within the application, and we're going to get into some of the forms and you'll be able to see that in action. Now, one of the things that I said is that that X3 is a web-enabled application as well. So I'm just going to quickly pop over here and open up my web browser, and you'll notice that the web browser is identical to the client. And here's my accounts receivable. If I happen to be over in accounts payable, for example, it's going to be able to pull that particular data up as well. The only difference that you'll probably notice is, and it's by virtue of the browser application, is that when I click on a particular teardrop here, the form layout may be a little bit different. So I still have my left list on this side here. I still have my header information and my line information, but the look and feel is just a little bit differently. Functionally, they are exactly the same. So I just wanted to quickly show you, as we're going through, we can flip through between the browser and also the client as well. I'm just going to go ahead and close this down. And we'll just go back into our area here. Now, one of the things that also that all ERP systems are, that you hope they have is that embedded workflow. So, and that holds true with X3 as well. And the embedded workflow can be leveraged throughout the entire application. And what we're looking for here is sort of that event, condition, and action, and telling the system, when this happens, I want you to do this. And I, put this on hold, and I also want you to send an email, or I want you to, the system to launch another application, or whatever the case may be. So I'm just going to pop over to the customers here and just show you, an example of what, how that embedded workflow works. And I'll just pop over to my management tab here. And in this case here, we're just going to go ahead and change this authorized credit limit. And then just by saving that, there's a workflow on top of this that, it's just a notification saying, let somebody know that somebody has changed that particular credit limit. And this could be, if you're putting in a sales order and they're over their credit limit and needs to be an approval processes and things like that. And you'll notice here that I've got this warning saying that this has happened. So let me just pop over to my Outlook here and just show you an example of what that, these are just examples of, emails or notifications that come through. These are completely defined by you as to what they say and how to interact with the system. But the important thing here is that when I click on this, is that it is telling me, what the previous limit was and what the actual credit limit is, or what it is now. But it also gives me an opportunity to go in and take a look, whether it be via the internet or going back right into the client. So if you do get these, on your mobile devices, by clicking on the internet, you could have access, through some type of a vehicle to get into the system through the internet. You have the ability to do that as well. This could also, if it was an approval process, for example, if I click on administration here and look at, say, purchase orders, I may want to have web services kick in and says, do you approve this or do you not? And just by virtue of clicking on yes or no, that could also communicate to what we'll call the back office in order to approve that, take it off hold, whatever the case may be. So we're really looking at that event, condition, action, not only things that have been started within the ERP system, but also outside of the ERP system to interact with it as well. All right then, let me just go back over to here. So we've been, sort of just talking about the navigation through the system. So let's get into the actual financial modules and talk about some of the things that are in there. So let me just close this down here. And I'm just going to pop out to another process map here and talk about, what the structure is within the application, within the ERP, the Sage X3 ERP application. So let's talk a little bit about, a traditional accounting package as opposed to an analytical or dimensional accounting package. So the X3 product is a dimensional accounting package. And the contrast between that and a traditional is this. In a traditional accounting environment that when you set up your chart of accounts or your structure of your organization, you have your company, information, you've got your sites or locations, then you'll have your natural account, and then you may have other segments that you want to capture very specific data on or transactions on. When you put that traditional account structure together and you tell the system, okay, go ahead and create my chart of account structure, it goes through and it concatenates all the combinations that you have defined. And you could end up with a very, very large chart of account structure. So from a maintenance perspective, if I needed to add a different account, I'd have to find all the combinations that I wanted it to hit. You know, if I wanted to add a new segment, it could be very difficult to do that. So, and also when I'm coding things from a transactional perspective, I'd have to go through, and even though I don't want it to hit this particular sales region, I may have to put 000s in there. So from a transactional perspective, or entering, it becomes, you know, a little arduous as well. When we get into an analytical chart of account structure, there's a couple of things that are very, very unique within that environment. First of all, you don't have to define the company and the location. The system knows what company that you're in and what location that you're putting transactions, and that just becomes part of the transaction identifier. So that is not part of the chart of account structure. So you're not concatenating that type of information. The next thing is that each of the pieces of the chart structure are really defined separately. So you're going to define what your natural account is, whatever that may be. So you've got a list of those natural accounts. And then you've got what you call dimensions that are associated with those particular natural accounts. So what really makes it nice is that you may have, and we'll see this in just a moment, you know, a natural account for my just general expenses that could be associated with all my dimensions, but I may have one particular natural account that may not have any dimensions at all. So the system is going to, you know, you're validating and say, here's the valid combinations, but the system doesn't go through and create all those combinations for you. You are just sort of identifying them, and we'll see that in just a moment. The X3 application then from an organizational structure is defined this way. So at the highest level then you've got your group, and if I click on this is going to show me that within my particular demo environment I have 4 different companies. So you can have multiple companies within one folder. Each of these companies can operate a little bit differently. They could have different chart of account structures. They could have different accounting periods. They could have, you know, they could be very, very unique, but you know, depending on who you are and if you have access to them, it makes it really easy to access those, and we're going to see that on an entry screen. Within this particular environment here, I'll say on my consolidated company, at the group level, I can see very, very quickly how my organizations roll up. So I've got these 3 particular locations that roll up to this company, these particular locations that roll up to this company, and so forth that roll up to a consolidated view. These pyramids or organizational structures can be user-defined, so you can have different looks and feels of your organization, and then you can use those going forward in reports and things like that as well. I'm just going to pop that back out here, and then that. The next area here is then talking about legislation. So within the X3 environment, it is a full multi-everything. So to have multi-legislation, multiple companies, multiple periods, multiple currencies, and so forth. We also have the legislation. So even though it, you know, multiple companies, it's very important to have legislations as well. So if you have a company that's based in the U.S. and a company that's based in France, for example, not only do they may have different chart of account structures, but they also have different ways that they need to function from a localization perspective. So legislations not only will say this is what is being dictated by that particular country, but also the localizations as well. So this is right down to this is the, you know, a check format that is in the U.S. And of course in France we don't use checks, it's all through wires and EFTs. So those types of legislations as well. The next level then is the company itself that roll up to these legislations, and if I click on this particular company here, it'll also show me then the the defaults that go along with that company as well. So I can have, here's this particular company. From an accounting perspective, you'll also say that, they could have a different chart of accounts and those types of things, so you're going to define that at the company level as well. You also can define different dimensions that each of these companies may use, so you don't have to use the same dimensions across all your companies. They can be very, very unique. The next level then is the actual locations or sites, and those are defined. If I just click on that again, you can have multiple locations, or they can be actual business units that you want to do separate reporting on. One of the unique things is, from an accounting perspective, is that you're going to define whether these particular locations are financial sites. So a location can also be a separate business unit. So if I have one company, but I have 3 very distinct business units, I may want to set them up as separate financial sites, so I can, do all my financial reporting very separately, but it does roll up to my organization as a whole. So I can treat them very, very independently as well. All right. So let's talk a little bit about then the actual structures of the chart of accounts. So one of the things that I talked about is that having different chart of account structures and things like that. So within the X3 environment, we can have what we call different ledgers. And a ledger can be, basically, it's a different book. And so within the X3 environment, I could actually manage multiple books or multiple ledgers within the same environment. So that being said, is that I could then book one transaction to multiple books, and they could hit my books very differently. So within my chart of account structure then, it's really where you're defining a lot of those areas. So in this chart of accounts, because I could have multiple, this particular chart of accounts is performing or reacting this way. So I've got general controls. It could be an analytical chart. I can have miscellaneous accounts where I'm defining, and these are really the default accounts within the application for this particular chart. The reciprocal accounts are basically telling me what locations can do business within this particular company. So for example, or these companies. So for example, this location here can do, inter-site or inter-company type of transactions this way, and so forth. So I'm really defining which of my locations can do business together. And then, and more defaults as far as, reporting codes. I've got my cash accounts here, and the root of that in my GL is 10, and those types of things. So I'm really just defining a lot of my defaults from this particular area. When I go into the actual ledgers itself, you'll notice that I can have multiple ledgers. So I can then have my general GAAP ledger where I'm going to do all my financial reporting at. I could have a ledger that's for IFRS reporting that I could do very different specific reporting off of. I could have a ledger just for statutory reporting. And those ledgers, the chart of accounts with those ledgers, don't have to be the same. So the nice thing is that when we get into the actual GL accounts itself, it allows me to define how those ledgers talk to each other. Let's just go into the account structure itself. So first of all, we talked about that dimensional accounting, and we've got here all the first or the natural accounts. So this is just an example of some of the natural accounts that happen to be in my particular chart structure for this particular company. And here are the classifications or all the demographics around a particular GL account. And let's just go through there because there's some really neat things or very strong things within the application. So on the general tab here, it's basically saying, this is what it is, this is, and very, sort of generic type of information. But this area here from accessibility, and this flows through to the entire application, is first of all an access code. So if you have multiple companies that may be sharing the chart of account structure, but you may have 4 unique GL accounts, this one is for company A, this one is for company B, and so forth, you can define a couple of things. First of all, who has access to that particular account? And so you don't have to have, this great big huge chart just because you're only going to allow certain people into certain areas. You can define that right down to an access code. Or you can define it right down to a company site or group. So if I do have just one unique GL account, I can say this GL account is only for this site or only for this company and so forth. I have the validity period too, so I can set these up ahead of time, or if I may set up a GL account that's only specific for a certain project, for example, and it's only going to be valid for 3 months. So, then after that time it's going to be inactive and so forth, but I can set these up and say, okay, it's only valid for this amount of time, and then if somebody tries to code something to that GL account before or after, then the system's going to bark at them and say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. The other thing is this restriction code. So this allows you to get really down to the nitty-gritty and say, okay, I've got my GL accounts and I've got my dimensions, but in some areas or some situations, it's really not, it doesn't make any sense in some combinations. And I'll give you an example. So for example, if we happen to be in advertising and I'm in accounts payable and my accounts payable person is coding something to my advertising account and I have a dimension that is production, and it just doesn't make any sense at all to be able to code that particular expense to that particular dimension. You can put restriction codes in there to say you can't do this. That's not a valid combination of a GL account and also these particular dimensions. So you can get very, down to the minutiae as to how these accounts also represent when you are putting in transactions. This area here, this default account, this is where when you do have multiple charts where you will be doing some mapping. So I can say that if I had another chart of account structure here, I could say, here's my advertising account, but in this particular chart, it is in a completely different GL account. And when I'm doing those mappings, then if I have another book, the system knows what GL account to book that transaction to in that particular ledger. So the mapping becomes very, very important, and it also allows you to keep those books in sync and so forth. Some of the controls, for example, I can, this is just some controls on the particular GL account itself. This area here from the miscellaneous is really, this particular area here is where I wanted to pick out, because we are going to be talking about fixed assets today, and you can define this right at the GL account as to what type of an asset it is. So if I happen to go up to my asset area here, so if my 17,000, it happens to be, it's part of fixed assets, so the system knows that when I put a transaction in against that GL account, the fixed asset module knows to pick that up, or it knows it's part of that particular module. And in this case here, it's a fixed asset in progress. I do have the ability, if it's a fixed asset for, say, for equipment, these are just defaults, and the system then knows that these are to be able to treat these assets this way. The other thing, too, when we get into the analytics side or the dimensions, is that if I just click back over here and go to, say, my expenses again, or miscellaneous expenses, when I go to the analytical tab, this is basically, you can set up your default saying, these are the dimensions that can be used with this GL account. So in this case here, I've got my department, my product line, a sales channel, and so forth. And when I said before is that not all GL accounts will have dimensions associated with it. So you could set up, say, on my sales revenue, it could have the same, but when I get into intercompany payables or my bank account or things like that, where I may not have any dimensions associated with it at all. So you could have, a variety of dimensions that, like I said, that are associated with a very specific GL account. All right, so that's basically the structure of that particular area. And just before that we leave this, I also just wanted to point out a couple of things here, is that from a budgeting perspective, you can have GL accounts where you're going to be doing budget tracking. So that allows us to be able to set up a budget against that particular GL account. You can default distributions. So basically saying that whenever I code to my telephone expense account, I automatically I'm going to split that telephone against these particular dimensions. So for example, I've got a $500 telephone expense. I've set up a distribution code that says split that out, and a percentage goes to this department, a percentage goes to this department, and so forth. So I don't have to enter that all the time. I could have defaults that come along with it as well. I also have non-financial units, so for statistical reporting, I can identify a GL account for statistical reporting as well. So let me just close that down, and that gives you a structure of how the organization or how the X3 environment is set up, from as far as the ledgers go, the chart of accounts, the actual accounts themselves, and then also the analytical accounts or the dimensions that are associated with it. All right, so let's take a look at then how these apply within. We'll start, since we're in the organization and we're talking about the journals and things like that, let's just pop over to the general ledger. So the first thing then is that I'm going to go into a journal entry screen here and show you a couple of things from the GL perspective. So first of all, you'll notice that I've got all my transactions that are coming up from the other modules. So in this case, I've got WIP transactions coming up. I may have transactions that are coming up from inventory, and all those are being defined by a type here. Remember that when I'm looking at a selection, if I want to look at, say, for example, just my payments or things that are hitting my bank or that type of transaction, I can define them this way. If I want to look at, just my journal entries, I can go ahead and just look at my journal entries that I'm putting in manually. When we get into this area here, there's a couple of things that I wanted to go on this side, over on this side here. So this holds true with all the modules as well. So when I'm going in and looking at a transaction, I do have the ability, remember when I said that I don't have to code or the site and the company is not part of my GL structure. So if I go ahead and just take this particular number out of here, so I want to show you some of the copying capabilities. I do have the ability then to have a default that goes in here. I do have the ability then to change this site, or I can look at a different site, and that was the location. So by just virtue of putting in a location, the system knows then that this transaction is for this location that belongs to this company. So that doesn't have to be part of the GL structure. It's now telling me what type of, what am I putting in as a journal entry. The category here is saying what type of a transaction is this. So a couple of things to point out here. You can have, it's an actual transaction that is going into the application. I could have simulations, so those what ifs. And the simulations are available for all my financial reporting, so I can put in a transaction to see, what effect it has on my financial statements. I could have templates out there, so if I can recall a template that if there's something that I use every month and I'm just going to recall that template and change the numbers and so forth, I can go ahead and do that as well. The status here, is it a temporary journal or is it a final journal? If it's a temporary journal and I'm putting that in, then I do have the ability then I could delete it because I haven't finalized it, and and things like that. So it allows me to do so if I've got that simulation out there to be able to do that finalization as well. And then some of the defaults that are going along here. From the line description here, and this holds true as well, I do have the ability to go into form mode on anything. So I don't have to go across that line. I do have the ability to enter that information on a form. So whether I'm in the GL or AR or AP, you have the ability to do that as well, or sales orders or purchase orders or whatever the case may be. Also, when we talked about that distribution, I'm just going to go over here and look at my allocation inquiry. Based on this particular line item, I put a distribution on that as utilities, saying that when I enter this $3,200 invoice, or if it happened to be in an AP or now in GL, I'm going to distribute that against these particular dimensions, which are my admin, sales, marketing, and IT, based on a percentage, and it'll calculate what that percentage is. So now when I'm looking at the GL, I can see very specifically what part of that $3,200 is being distributed to that particular dimension. Okay. And then I do have the ability, if I go in there and look at the actual account inquiry, I can see everything that happens to be in that particular GL account and these transactions. So one of the things within the X3 environment as well is being able to access data very, very quickly. So if I wanted to see this particular journal entry, just by putting my thumb on it or clicking on it, I can right mouse click and see, go right down into that particular journal entry. If it happened to be a sales order, I'd go right into the sales order entry screen, and we'll look at that in just a moment as well. Just before we leave this particular area on the GL, I just wanted to show you a couple things. I'll just go ahead and create this, and it's going to say copy. So I didn't have to enter a lot of information. I just copied the transaction that was out there. But we did talk about different books as well, and I do have a different book set up in this environment, and and just by clicking on this currency, you'll notice down here I've got a $3,200 US dollar transaction, but by clicking on the currency, I do have a Canadian dollar book that's associated with this. So this transaction is going into my US dollar book, and it's also going into my Canadian dollar book, and it's doing all the necessary exchange rates based on the rates that I've set up in the system. So I've now because I've got these transactions in my Canadian dollar book, from a financial perspective, I could go in and run a financial report just on my Canadian dollar ledger. Okay, so let me just go ahead and end this out here. So that gives you an idea from a GL perspective, those types of things. So let's go ahead and look at just some of before we leave the GL, from an online reporting perspective. If I wanted to go into the account balances here, for example, it's now showing me that here's my ledger type. So like I said, I could have multiple ledgers out there, and it's looking at all my GL accounts that have activity on it. If I scroll down here and I want to I'll just keep using my miscellaneous GL account here, by right mouse clicking, I can go ahead and take a look at that account, and now I can see all the transactions that make up the value of that particular GL account. Just by clicking here on, say, this particular transaction, I can right mouse click here, and it's now taking me somewhere else. I could go right into the GL and look at the journal journal transaction, or I could let me go look at the purchase invoice, for example, where it originated. So it is taking me back to the original source documents to be able to show me where these transactions are coming from. And depending on what type of a transaction it is, of course, you're going to have multiple types of things to take a look at or drill around in. So that's from that particular area. But then I also have the ability, if I wanted to go in and just look at the dimension balances as well. So if I wanted to look at a specific dimension, so for example, my departments, and see all the transactions that make up a specific department, I'd be able to do that as well right from here. So let's go in and take a look at, so let's start within, the AR, for example, and see some of the things that are in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on my AR tab here, and we'll go in and take a look at the customer file. Now within the X3 environment, we have customers and vendors, of course, but we consider those, or what that is in the X3 world, is a business partner. And you'll notice here that I've got one particular business partner, which is my Sage Demo business partner, but I've defined a role for them as a customer and a supplier. They could be a customer, a supplier, and they could be a miscellaneous supplier, whatever the case may be. But really the key here is that I'm able to have one common key, but be able to have that split out to say this is who my business partner is, but I treat them as a customer as well as a particular vendor. Now that allows me to do a lot of nice types of reporting. So for example, if I am dealing with this customer as a vendor as well, I could do reporting, say what do they owe us, what do they owe me, and let me see the balances from that perspective. When I'm in cash receipt entry, for example, and I'm putting a payment against a supplier or a customer invoice, I could also see, well, what do I owe them, and net those types of transactions out. So I do have the ability to do that, and we can take a peek at that in just a moment. So a couple of things here as well. So this is my customer. On the top here, we've got a number of different things from an access perspective as well. So if I wanted to look at an inquiry, I could inquire about orders for this particular customer. But in this case here, I'm going to look at the accounting information and look at the risk analysis. And really, this is bringing everything together for this particular customer and showing me very quickly, what our exposure is. And this is very specific to this company and this location. Now, if I've got a common customer that I have all my companies are accessing, I do have the ability to clear that out and then just hit enter, and I'm going to have a different view because now I'm seeing, here's my company, but here's all my locations that are working with that or dealing with that particular customer, and this is my total exposure for that. So this allows me then, in looking at the risk and saying, what's on order? I can see $31,000 are on order, but let me go ahead and see what those orders are. So just by clicking on that, it's now showing me exactly what those orders are. Also within X3, you do have the ability to move anything that you want out to an Excel spreadsheet. So if I wanted to take that out to an Excel report, I'd have the ability to do that and not only have this information exported out the values, but it also will export all the formulas and everything as well. So just by clicking on that, I could change how, what I want to see in the columns and things like that, but I'll just click on my export here. There's a nice Microsoft warning for ActiveX, and I'll just let that move over to Excel, and then just open up my book here. And then it'll show you exactly what that information is. So anything that's in a grid within the X3 environment, you have the ability to export them. And then you also have the ability, like I said, if that the values are out there, to be able to look at any totalings that have been done within those grid views as well. Let me just close this down here, and I'll just end this. So this area here then, like I said, we do have that access if I wanted to see the invoices the same way. If I wanted to look at all the open items for this particular customer, I have the ability to do that. And then I've got some nice the statistical views down here as well. And then the last operations really is, what have we done with this? What was the last thing we did with this particular customer? So here's, I can go ahead and right mouse click and see the last order, the last payment that was made, the last invoice that was sent out, and those types of things. So this not only is on as a risk from a customer's perspective, but it also shows the risk as it is from a supplier's perspective as well with our exposure for this particular supplier. Also from here, I do have the ability to do a number of things. So if I happen to have that customer up, I do have the ability then to go ahead and create an order or an appointment or a telephone call, because this does have some embedded customer relationship type of management type of functionality. So I can record any conversations that I'm having with this customer and so forth. But I'm going to go ahead and if we wanted to go in and collect and create an order, then it's basically saying what type of order do you want, so you can have multiple types of orders out there as well. And I'm just going to click on this particular standard order. Those defaults with that customer come along with it. And then I have the ability to go ahead and just put in some line information. So I can go ahead and put in a product, and I'll just quickly do that. And I'll just tab over to here. We'll order 5. Charge them $9, and then I can go ahead and just create that particular order. So very quickly, I have the ability to do that, and without going back out to my main screens. Remember, I still have the ability to have all these nice little breadcrumbs, and then I also have access to all my favorites. But very quickly, I was able to put that particular order in. Now, I could go ahead and just hit the delivery button to be able to do that, and you'll notice here's my workflow that has kicked off, sending an email to my customer thanking them for their order, for example. But I do have the ability then to take this through that particular process and then deliver it and invoice it and so forth, which I can take the normal steps that you would normally do within a sales process area. Now, a couple of things while we're here, you'll notice this taxing area here, and if I click on that, I just wanted to quickly show you this, my X3 environment is connected to our Sage sales tax. So very quickly it's gone out and pinged a web service to be able to say, what does this, based on the, what this customer is ordering, what the ship to is, what are the taxes that are being calculated on it, and it very quickly calculates those taxes for me. So also within the X3 environment, if you choose not to, or if you're doing business in a lot of different areas in North America, for example, very highly recommended to use the Sage sales tax, and so you don't have to keep all those particular taxing authorities and things like that within the environment. So let me just go ahead and end this out here. So based on, the AR type area, then I can go ahead and follow this along where I put, started with my customer, I put in a sales order, I could ship it. If I did have any returns or credit memos, I could, do that as well. But really from an invoicing perspective, being able to just go ahead and invoice that particular customer. So very, very straightforward as far as the process goes from the AR perspective. When we get into the cash application area, I just wanted to click on that. You have a variety of different types of transactions, and these can be user-defined. So depending on what you are doing within your business, I've got some ACH payments set up here. I can do some EFTs. I could use MICR checks or whatever the case may be. And you're just basically saying what type of a payment. Now I can of course do en-masse payments when we get into AP, but really I'm using one type of payment transaction here. So if I go into receipts here, just to give you an example of what that may look like, is that I've started with the receipt payment here. I put in my customer, and I just wanted to show you when we talked about the netting or being able to say what does this customer owe us and what do we owe them. You'll notice here I've got a customer invoice for of invoice 171 for $2,500, and I've got a supplier invoice of the SP here of supplier invoice number 93, and it was for $1,500. So the net result of that is $985 that we still owe this particular customer. In this particular drawer over here, this group due dates really does show me everything this customer or business partner owes us and what we owe them. And I can see that, here's some more AP expenses, here's some more, here's some AR expenses, and things like that. So I do have the ability to pull those all into one form and then be able to net those out and be able to, in this case here, they still owe us $985, but if we owed them, I could then say, here, go ahead and generate or issue a check for this particular customer. So that allows me to do that. Okay, couple of other things here as well. We do have the ability to run statements. So if you do have the requirement to doing statements, and statements goes a little bit further here as well. So when I click on the statement area, you'll notice that I can generate the statement. So it's going to go out based on the defaults that I've set for these particular customers to generate these statements. Now within the X3 environment, there's a parameter setting that says that you may or may not pay off of a statement. And if you do allow, and I don't see this often, but if you are sending out a statement and a customer sends you a check based on the statement number, because you do have a statement number, at the cash receipt entry, I could pay off of a statement. It doesn't necessarily have to be at individual invoice lines. So if I'm paying off a statement and my statement was, $700 outstanding, and I put in $500, the system would automatically say $500 goes to the oldest invoice and so forth, and you still have $200 out. And that is a parameter setting. You don't have to use that. You could just send out statements to your customers and then, carry on from a cash perspective or cash receipt perspective to have the cash applied to individual invoices. But if I do use that statement, then I can update it and validate it, and then, like I said, the statement then becomes a valid payment vehicle instead of just an invoice. Also within this environment, we have reminder letters or dunning letters, and you can have different levels, so and up to 5 levels. So the first level will be, a very nice, maybe you forgot about this particular invoice and so forth, up to a very strong invoice. When you run those particular reminders, the system remembers what letters have been sent out to the customers, so it won't include them in, if you're doing another letter run, it's not going to include them again. So you do have a lot of parameter setting around sending out reminder letters and dunning letters as well. So that talks a little bit about the AR, and that's really, money coming in. AP is money going out. So same type of process. So if we go ahead and take a look at the supplier, for example, and we're looking at a business partner. So in this case here, I still have my same business partner, but I have different defaults that come along from from the vendor perspective because it's our credit limit, for example, and those types of things. But I do have the ability to go in here and create an order or create an invoice, the same type of things. I do have the inquiry here that I can go in and look at the risk analysis, but that's, my risk or my exposure with this particular vendor, for example. If I go in and head and create an order, and it's going to go look at, from a purchasing perspective, it's now saying, okay, I've launched the purchasing area, so let's go ahead and put a purchase order in, and I wanted to show you a couple of things that can be leveraged in the purchasing area. So let me go ahead and click on the line items here, and I'll just put in a miscellaneous type of line item here, and I'll just say that we're going to order one, and the value is going to be $300 or whatever the case may be. When I go ahead and create that, a couple of things that I wanted to show you here. First of all, you could have, a default for reports to be printed out. In this case here, this is my purchase order report that's going to be sent out, or it could be emailed or faxed or whatever the case may be automatically. Those are just settings within the environment. But on this particular line item here, there's a couple things that I wanted to show you. First of all, I wanted to be, we're going to talk about budgeting here in a little bit, but I could go in and look at my budget for this particular GL account. So when I click on that, I can see that here's the budget that it's being tracked against for this particular period. I could have a different ledger. There's the GL account, and I can see the actual amounts that have been posted against this particular budget. I can see commitments that are against this particular GL account. So it really does allow me to track this. A couple of the settings, also parameter values within the environment is it just a warning, or are you going to block people from going over budget? Do you have tolerances? Maybe I can go over by 10% or so forth. But those are rules and settings that you choose and you can decide as you're going forward. But that shows you, one area there. If I wanted to go in and look at the actual commitments, if there's multiple commitments, it's going to show me multiple commitments for this particular budgeting area or for this particular GL account. So I do have the ability to do that as well. I could also put in pre-commitments. So if I'm putting in, something that I, haven't received yet, but I know I'm going to get it, those types of things I can put in commitments against a budget number as well. So that will show me those types of things. If I just click here as well and go into my form mode, remember on my GL, I didn't have a lot of entry fields associated with it, but I could have many more here. But a couple things that I want to point out is, first of all, is my purchase type here. So in this case here, it's a purchase, but I could have it going to a fixed asset. So by virtue of, because this was just a miscellaneous expense, that I didn't have the GL account tied to a fixed asset account, that I could define it here saying this is it's miscellaneous expense, but I'm going to put it over to my fixed asset module. I do have the ability to flag that here, and then I can have access to it here. I do have the ability to just put in expenses against a fixed asset too, and that will show up in fixed assets, and we'll take a look at that in a moment as well. Couple of other things here. We've got this matching tolerance, and a matching tolerance will allow me to say I can have different rules for matching. So not only at the receipt level, but also at the invoice level, and I can have a variety of codes. So, and I can also have them defaulted at the item level if I'm using inventory master records. But in this case here, if it's just invoicing, if I'm just putting in a customer invoice, I could, from that perspective, I could have all my matching tolerances that I could dictate here. You can have those defaulted in from the supplier, or they could be defaulted in from a part, or I could go ahead and select that here and put one in at data entry as well. So this just gives you, some of the things that you can leverage within the financial environment as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and save that. So a couple of things that we were talking about the AP side. So we created the purchase order. We can go ahead and, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and open this up just one more time again here. I can put in my dimensions. Remember, we talked about dimensions. So if this expense happens to be against a particular department or dimension or a project, whatever the case may be, I can go ahead and select a dimension from that and have that all in here. Now, I could have defaults that come in with the dimensions, and I can also flag them as being mandatory entries. So there are a lot of controls around that as well. So you're going to force users to enter data, those types of things. And then I'm going to go through, and then from an AP, from a purchasing perspective, to go in and receive that information. I'm just going to click on this. I can go in and receive that information just following this process flow map, receive it, and then you're going to voucher it. As far as looking at those tolerances, you're going to have some, if you have any errors or whatever your rules are around tolerances. And of course, you can have approval processes around that as well. And then we're going to go ahead and pay that particular AP invoice. So there's a couple things that I can do here. First of all, I can go in on a one-off and manually, so if I've got a vendor that says you really need to pay me on this particular invoice, I can go ahead and do them on a one-off. And the screen is exactly the same as if we were going into the payment receipt area, but we're actually just going to go into, say, my automatic issuance, which is, my having the checks run for me. And if I hit new here and put in my supplier that I've been using, just go through here. And remember, my grouped accounts here shows me everything that we may owe. So the same way here, we could do some netting, or I could just say, you know what, I'm just going to pay this particular invoice here. I do have the ability to say I'm not going to pay all $1,500 of it, and maybe I'm only going to pay $1,300 of it. It's going to show me my balances and so forth. So very quickly, I can do the one-offs. And if I'm doing any type of EFTs, electronic funds transfers, then I can also use these milestones. I'll just say OK, because it's just telling me that my balances were the same. I can also use these milestones to tell me exactly what I have to do in order to get this particular payment out the door. In this case here, I need to print the payment, I need to post it, and so forth. If it was an actual EFT, it would tell me I needed to create or produce the bank file as well. And that's just based on the payment type that I've chosen. Okay. I also have the ability to go in and en masse be able to do this. So one of the things that we haven't talked about is just a lot of times you're going to go into a screen where you've got a lot of parameters that, or choices or filters as to what you want to do, whether it be a report that is going to be run. In this case, I may want to put very specific information on my payment proposal. I only want to pay this one business partner. I only want to do this one location, or whatever the case may be. So you can have a variety of different filters, and you can save those anywhere within any of the these applications, and I can just say, well, these are the ones that I have, and these are just the default filters that I've set up. And I'm just going to click on proposal here, and then it's going to put my defaults in there, and then I can click OK. So based on those defaults, and you can have a variety of them set up, and you can just pick and choose, this is just going out and telling me everything that needs to be paid on those particular parameters. And it's got a default that says yes. I could, change those defaults as well. I could say I'm going to pay these, I'm not going to pay this one, I'm not going to pay this one, and so forth, or have a selection criteria as we're going through, for example. But I also then can go in and just pay certain dollar amounts. So in this case here, I'll say, yeah, I'm going to pay that one, but I'm only going to pay $150 or $100 of it. And then quickly, my typing skills, everybody's watching, that's why I can't type. I can go ahead and create that, and then it's going to go in and say that I produced one payment. I can go in and tell me what that payment is, and then I can go in and take a look at it, change it. But that allows me to sort of group things and do things en masse as well, so very quickly be able to do that. Okay, so we've sort of covered off the GL, AP, and AR, and these are just really types of checks that we've got in there. Sorry about that. And what I wanted to just sort of finish up on were some of the fixed asset area as well as some of the budgeting areas, and just talk about that. So I'm just going to go over here and click on my business processes again and pull up my, my fixed asset process map. So a couple of things when we talk about fixed assets is that the fixed asset module, covers everything within the fixed asset area, where it's, if you're doing IFRS reporting, generally GAAP reporting, so you can have multiple books within the fixed asset area as well. So for just tax reporting and whatever the case may be. Of course, only one book will post to the general ledger, but you do have the ability to look at different books and how different depreciation methods may affect those particular books. You do have the ability to have leasing for, say, like long-term rentals, subsidies. You can do intra-group transfers, so between locations and things like that. You can do, there is a stock taking, so basically for your fixed assets, which is not inventory, but assets, desks and things like that, you can print out asset tags and be able to do all your counting and things like that. So that it really is full-featured as far as, the types of assets that you can track. We already looked at the purchase orders, and when we tag that particular line item as a fixed asset, this now allows that particular asset or that particular expense, so we can go ahead and capitalize it in the fixed asset module. So a couple of things. So I can do it right, I can tag those right at the GL level. I can then put in AP invoices or purchase orders and tag them from that area. I also have the ability to actually just enter them right into, there's a fixed asset expense area as well, which then allows the fixed asset module to pick that up too. But if we go into the asset management area here, this is really where, the assets will show up. So I can go ahead, and there's a number of things that I can do in this area as well. So I've just got some assets that have already been set up. I can go ahead and say, for example, on one particular AP invoice, order 10 computers, but I want them to be distributed or split within my fixed assets into 10 separate fixed assets. So I do have the ability to do some splitting and those types of things. I can do impairments, revaluations, I can change the depreciation method and so forth, and those are all transaction types within the application. If I look at the posting areas here, I can see things that have been posted, those types of things. I can look at the actual depreciation, and you'll notice I've got a couple of books here, and I could have different depreciation methods. I've got sort of straight line, and I've got a user-defined type of depreciation method as well. So you can be very selective as to how you want to look at this particular asset. If I click down on the fixed asset tab here, it's showing me that I've got a couple of expenses out there that I can either pull in to this particular asset, or I could create a new asset based on an expense as well. So I do have the ability to do that too. If I click on, I'm just going to cancel this here. If I click on my plan simulation, it shows me then I can do a calculation based on, what the depreciation methods that I have out there. So I can go ahead and just click on calculate, and based on this particular book it. Here's the depreciation method or the depreciation schedule that's out there and how this particular item is going to depreciate. So very full-featured. Of course, there's processes now. Once I set this particular asset up to put it into service, and then go ahead and do your month-end depreciation, and then book those depreciation expenses right to the GL. So really nice to be able to start from a purchase order, an AP invoice, and carry it right through to fixed asset and have those particular particular transactions booked to the GL. Last but not least, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was some of the budgeting functionality within the application. So let's just go in and, look at this area here. And if I go into the financials, and there's really two areas or two budgeting features within the X3 environment, really a place to manage or put in budget numbers, and where I was doing my budget to actuals, when I'm put in my purchase order, where I could check my budget, those types of things. So I do have the ability to go into budgets and go into and define what type of budgets they are. So in this case here, I've got just my operating budget or just my general corporate budget, and then I may have some operating budgets, and we're going to talk about those in just a moment. I can have a different type of budget, so the control type, is it an annual budget? Is it accumulated? Is it just by period? Does the values move over from period to period, and those types of things? So I'm really defining what type of a budget it is here. I can also have different versions of the budget, so as we're going through, I can finalize one and then make a revision, all those types of things. And then these are always then available for me to do my budget to actual types of reporting as well. So this, basically then, from the budgeting perspective, it does allow me some functionality to, create the budget, but really where I can define or put those numbers in as far as, here's my GL account, here's my dimension, and I'm going to spend X amount of dollars this year on that particular, in that particular area. When I go into the operating budgets, that allows me to really, or advanced budgeting, that allows me to do a number of different things within the X3 environment. So let me just go ahead and click on here and go into my operating budget, and it really takes it one step further. So for example, I may have, my corporate budget at a GL account is X amount of dollars, but I have a project that I'm going to set up, and I'm going to use or facilitate some of that dollar amount for this specific project. So I can really then define what the projects are. You don't have to have a project, but you may do that. So let me just click on the projects here. So I can have a variety of different types of projects. So for example, I might have just my operational budget for the year. For example, this is how I'm going to spend it. I might have an IT budget. If I'm doing software selection, I could have a software selection budget that I may want to keep track of, if I wasn't keeping track of it as a dimension in my GL, for example, because I do have the ability to budget just down to the dimension level as well. But this really takes me to a higher level and says, I've got this bucket of money, and this is how I'm going to spend it. So, for this particular project. So once I define that project, then I can go in and look at how I'm going to spend that particular bucket of money, and that's really what we call an envelope. And I always like to think my envelope says buckets of money. So within this envelope or this bucket of money for this particular project, because I could have one project that is tied to multiple envelopes. So you could do a lot of those types of scenarios as well. But this is really saying, how much is this envelope worth, or how much is this bucket of money worth, and how is it being distributed, or how is it being used? So I can have approval processes within this, so I can approve the envelope, or I can approve separate lines within that particular envelope, for example. And this is just telling me, is it for 1 year, or is it a multi-year type of budget? So if I've got a big capital project, for example, I may want to set up an operating budget to track that capital project, but it may go across multiple years. So I do have the ability to do that too if it's a multiple or multi-annual, or we call it a multi-plural type of envelope. And then once that's defined, then at the bottom here, I can see what the actual lines are. So for this particular envelope, I'm going to be very specific and say, out of that, at this GL account level, I'm going to spend X amount of dollars. Out of this account, we're going to this X amount of dollars and so forth. So I'm really being very specific as to, or actually very general as to how it's going to be spent. And this down here, as I'm coding that on my line, because these become dimensions that I'm actually keeping that information against, then it's going to be able to calculate that and show me what those particular values are as far as what's being committed, what's been pre-committed, we talked about those, what's been consumed, and really how much money do you have left. When we have the budgets all in place and they have been approved, then I do have the ability to go in and look at purchase detail. So at any given time, I can see with this bucket of money for this particular project, these are all the invoices, or this is the activity that's been going along with it. So I can go ahead and click on, a particular invoice, for example. So if I'm looking at this invoice here, it's going to take me right to that. I can see what that value is if I wanted to do some more investigating and so forth. But it really does keep everything very, very nicely in one place, and it allows me to really manage that budget at a much more granular level. So that sort of gives you an idea of, the types of budgeting within the application. Last but not least, I just wanted to quickly talk about or show you some of the financial reporting. And within the SAGE Business Intelligence Financial Reporting, it's an Excel add-in, and I've started this. I've got this up and running. So a couple of things within this. So when you open up Excel, it's now going to have, this BI tool tab here, and that's really the financial reporting area. The Business Intelligence tool comes with a number of templates. So very quickly, this is talking to the X3 database, but very quickly, I can go in here, pick a particular template that I want to use, and I can have multiple, and I can also create my own templates on some of the financial statements that I want to create. And I can go ahead and click on that, and it's going to go through, take the raw data that I have, and very quickly produce a financial report for me. So I have the ability to do that, on the fly, and very, very quickly create an income statement. You'll, rows and columns. A couple of things that I can do here. I can change the period because I brought in the entire year, but I could just look at a very specific period, say period 4, and hit apply, and now I can see some numbers in there. If I open these up, it's now taking, when we're using those roll-ups, and X3 knows that here's all my sales revenue accounts, here's all my sales revenue clearing accounts and things like that. And, based on the company that I'm in and also the site that I'm, was doing transactions in, I do have the ability to drill down on these. So if I wanted to see what made up this particular value, I could go ahead and drill down. I'm just going to hit the execute button here. And now it's going to show me all the information, or all the sales invoices that made up that particular value for that particular location and so forth. So it was for this company, this location, and here's the GL accounts that it actually hit. So very quickly I can use the templates, but I also have the ability to edit these on the fly as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit this particular income statement and bring up the report designer. And this is really a nice tool that allows you to very quickly create these reports. These are functions that have been defined. So you'll notice down on the left-hand side, here's my rows. So I've got my sales revenue, and here's my spacer, and here's my sales, and here's my cost of sales and gross profit, which is really down the left-hand side. Across the columns, I've got my actuals to budgets to priors, so I can just pull those in very quickly just by clicking on what these functions are. I also have the ability to put in formulas. I could add new formulas. I could edit the ones that are in there, so if I'm doing any type of calculations within my financial statements, I have the ability to do that as well. I could also filter on things, so if I'm bringing everything in and I only want to look at something specific, if I click on the filters here, I may say, well, I want to look at, just by location. And being able to do that, Yep, I can go ahead and generate that again, or I could group it by multiple companies. So if I've got multiple companies out there, and in my column layouts I want to see company 1, company 2, company 3, I could group them just from a company perspective. So you have a lot of flexibility on how you want to create or produce these reports. And then I'm just going to hit the generate button here just to show you a difference of how these are. It opens up another tab along the bottom. And now I have a completely different financial statement based on filters. So now if I wanted to look at this, I can say I only want to look at location 2. I could click on that, or I could have multiple views, but I'm just going to click on 2. So now I know that I'm just looking at this location for this company. So very quickly I'm able to do that. From a distribution perspective, you do have the ability to sort of set up distribution parameters. So for example, I've set up one here, and I'll just show you what it looks like, is that for my management instruction or distribution, I'm going to click that over here. I'm going to send them, and these are all the tabs that happen to be along in this workbook. I'm going to send them the notes, and I'm going to send them this particular financial statement. If I had another distribution, I could send them all 3. If I had another distribution, I may only send them 1. And then based on that, then I'm able just to go send now, and these can be scheduled. You don't have to do these manually. They can be scheduled. I then have the ability to send those out via email based on that, and then I can just click over here, and then they can see financial statements that, that are coming out within this environment here. So you do have the ability to do that. So I just wanted to quickly show you some of the financial reporting, and I think we're getting pretty close to the end of our session. And what I wanted to do was open up the telephone lines, and I think we have a number of people on the call, but if you haven't been sending questions in, we'll open up the telephone lines, and we can go ahead and ask some questions.